I discovered a journal, realized 30 years of her control, secretly planned my escape, left quietly, filed for divorce, and finally reclaimed my life. Everyone saw us as the perfect couple, always together, never arguing in public, the ideal partnership. What they didn't see were the invisible chains that grew heavier with each passing year. It started subtly, as these things often do. The gentle suggestions about what I should wear to work became firm instructions. "That tie doesn't suit you," she'd say, already pulling out the one she preferred. My schedule became hers to manage. "I've arranged dinner with the Andersons on Thursday," she'd announce, never asking if I had other plans or preferences. 3 decades ago, I was captivated by her confidence and decisiveness, qualities I admired but lacked myself. Somewhere along the way, that admiration transformed into submission. Each morning, she'd lay out my clothes while I showered. My meals were prepared according to what she deemed appropriate, not what I craved. "You need to watch your cholesterol," she'd remind me, removing the foods I enjoyed from our home. My phone became an extension of her surveillance. "Who texted you?" she'd ask immediately after hearing the notification sound. I stopped maintaining friendships outside her approved circle. It was easier than facing her interrogations, or the cold silence that would inevitably follow. The realization didn't come as a dramatic epiphany. Instead, it surfaced during an ordinary moment last month while cleaning out the garage, a task she'd scheduled for me that Saturday. Behind some old paint cans, I found a dusty box containing mementos from my 20s. Among them was a leather-bound journal filled with ambitious dreams and plans for adventures I'd never taken. Reading those pages written in my younger hand, I barely recognized myself, the man who wanted to take motorcycle trips across state lines, who sketched designs for furniture he hoped to build, who wrote about starting his own business. Where had he gone? I sat on the concrete floor of the garage for hours, turning pages and confronting the harsh truth. I hadn't simply evolved as a person over 30 years. I'd been systematically erased. That night at dinner, she noticed something different. "You're quiet," she observed, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And you didn't fold the laundry like I asked." "I got distracted in the garage," I replied, studying her reaction. Her expression hardened for just a moment before she composed herself. "Well, the garage does need organizing. Did you find anything interesting?" I hesitated, then lied for perhaps the first time in years. "Just some old tax documents we can shred." The journal now sat hidden in my briefcase, a small act of rebellion that felt monumental. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake beside her, listening to her steady breathing and wondering when exactly I had surrendered my autonomy. When had her controlling behavior, which she always framed as love and concern, become my accepted reality? The next morning, I altered my routine by just 5 minutes, stopping for coffee at a shop near my office instead of drinking the thermos she prepared. It was a small act, insignificant to most, but it was the first independent decision I'd made in years. "You smell like that cheap coffee place," she commented when I returned home that evening. Not accusing, just noting a data point being filed away. I nodded, offering no explanation or apology. Another small rebellion. That week, I began noticing things I'd been blind to before. How she checked the mileage on my car to ensure I hadn't deviated from my usual routes. How she'd call my office number when my cell went straight to voicemail. The way she'd subtly isolate me from family members who asked too many questions or encouraged any independence. 30 years had transformed me from an equal partner into property, someone to be managed, directed, and controlled. The weight of this realization was crushing but also clarifying. For the first time in decades, I began to see a different future for myself. I didn't know yet what form my escape would take, but as I closed my eyes that night, with the journal hidden beneath my side of the mattress, I knew with absolute certainty that the countdown to my departure had begun. The morning after my discovery in the garage, I woke with an unfamiliar feeling, anticipation. For the first time in years, I was curious about what the day might bring, not because of what was scheduled for me, but because of what small changes I might introduce. I started with my appearance. During my lunch break, I visited a barber shop several blocks from my office. Not the one she'd arranged for me to visit every 6 weeks. The stylist suggested something slightly different, shorter on the sides while leaving more length on top. Looking in the mirror afterward, I saw a glimpse of my younger self. When I arrived home that evening, her eyes immediately fixed on my hair. "What happened?" she asked, her voice carefully modulated, but failing to hide her displeasure. Needed a change, I replied casually, hanging my coat as I always did. The usual place was too busy. She circled me like a wary predator, examining the haircut from all angles. You should have waited. This doesn't suit your face shape at all. Once this comment would have made me doubt myself, even feel guilty for making a decision without her approval. Instead, I felt a small thrill of defiance. I like it, I said simply and walked past her into the kitchen. Her footsteps followed. I made your favorite tonight, she announced, though the dish she was preparing was actually one I tolerated rather than enjoyed. It occurred to me that she might not even know my true preferences anymore. That night, I created an email account she didn't know about. Using my work laptop during lunch breaks, I reconnected with an old college friend. Our correspondence was nothing dramatic, just updates on our lives, reminiscences about our younger days. But each message felt like oxygen to someone who'd been slowly suffocating. My small acts of independence continued over the following weeks. I changed my route home to include a stop at a bookstore. I bought novels without showing her first. I ordered clothes online that I selected myself. Each seemingly minor decision rebuilt something within me that had been systematically dismantled over decades. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. Her monitoring intensified. She'd casually pick up my phone when it chimed, scanning messages before handing it back. She began calling my office at random times. Just checking in, she'd say, but we both knew she was verifying my whereabouts. One evening, she confronted me about a receipt she'd found in my pocket. Just coffee and a muffin from a cafe near the park where I'd started taking solitary walks. You're being wasteful, she said, dangling the paper between her fingers. I pack perfectly good lunches for you every day. Sometimes I need fresh air and a change of scenery, I replied. If something's wrong with my cooking, just tell me, she countered immediately, recasting my small act of independence as a criticism of her. It was a familiar tactic, one that had worked countless times before, make me feel guilty, selfish, ungrateful. But now I recognized the manipulation for what it was. Your cooking is fine, I said. This isn't about you. Her eyes widened slightly at such direct resistance. Well, who is it about then? She demanded. The question hung in the air. I nearly answered truthfully, it's about me reclaiming some small measure of control over my own life. Instead, I shrugged and moved past her to wash my hands for dinner. That weekend, saying I needed to organize some paperwork for tax season, I spent hours examining our financial situation. What I discovered was illuminating and disturbing. While we both worked throughout our marriage, our finances were far from equal. My paychecks were directly deposited into accounts she managed. My access to our savings was limited. Even the house was solely in her name. Despite my contributions to the mortgage for decades, I had been so thoroughly managed that I'd surrendered even basic knowledge of our financial situation. The realization was jarring. I wasn't just emotionally constrained, I was financially tethered as well. That night, while she slept beside me, I lay awake planning my next steps. Freedom would require more than small rebellions. It would need strategy, resources, and courage. The young man who wrote ambitious plans in that journal decades ago hadn't completely disappeared. After all, he was awakening, remembering how to want things for himself. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized that the invisible chains I'd felt for years were beginning to show hairline fractures. They weren't broken yet, far from it, but for the first time I could envision a life beyond them. Planning my escape required the kind of methodical thinking I once applied to work projects before she convinced me to take a less demanding position. I needed to be strategic. One misstep could collapse everything before I gained my freedom. First came financial independence. During lunch breaks, I consulted with a financial advisor, explaining my situation in carefully measured terms. I need to establish separate finances from my spouse, I said, avoiding the word escape, though we both understood the subtext. The advisor recommended opening a new bank account at a different institution. Use your work address for all correspondence, she suggested, her eyes conveying understanding beyond her professional advice. That same week, I opened the account and arranged for a portion of my upcoming bonus, which my wife didn't know about, to be deposited there. It wasn't enough for a complete fresh start, but it was seed money for what I now recognized as my liberation fund. I began documenting everything, each controlling comment, each instance where she made decisions without consulting me, each time she checked my whereabouts or inspected my belongings. This wasn't just for potential legal purposes. It was to remind myself that I wasn't imagining things, that my desire for freedom was justified. The more aware I became, the more patterns I noticed. She scheduled doctor's appointments for me without asking, then insisted on attending them. She maintained relationships with my siblings while gradually limiting my direct contact with them. She even had opinions about which parking spot I should use at the grocery store. One Tuesday, fate intervened. While getting coffee at a shop I'd started frequenting, I ran into a former colleague who had moved to a different city years ago. "You haven't changed a bit," he lied kindly as we caught up. "What brings you back?" I asked. "Expanding the business," he explained. "We're opening a branch office here and looking for experienced people. You always had a good head for operations." The conversation could have ended there, a casual exchange between old acquaintances. Instead, I heard myself say, "I might be interested in hearing more about that." He looked surprised but pleased. "Really? That would be great. Let me take your number." I gave him my new secret email address instead. "I prefer written details first," I explained. That night at dinner, she noticed my distraction. "You're somewhere else tonight," she said, her fork poised midair. "Something happened at work?" For a moment, I considered telling her about the job possibility, a reflexive urge born from decades of reporting every detail of my day. Instead, I mentioned a fictional deadline, and she immediately launched into how I should handle it, who I should speak with, how I should phrase my emails. "I've got it under control," I said, interrupting her flow of instructions. Her expression shifted from helpful to affronted. "I'm just trying to help you succeed. You know you struggle with assertiveness in professional settings." The comment stung because it contained a kernel of truth, but only because she had systematically undermined my confidence for years. "Things are changing," I said quietly. Her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just that I'm handling more things independently at work these days." She studied me for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Well, don't let it stress you out. You know how you get when you're overwhelmed." That night, after she went to sleep, I checked my email and found a detailed job description from my former colleague. The position offered slightly less than my current salary but included relocation assistance. Most importantly, it was in a city 3 states away. For the first time, escape felt tangible rather than theoretical. I could visualize myself in a new place, making decisions without consultation or permission. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. The next few days saw an escalation in her controlling behavior, as if she sensed my growing independence. She suggested I might be developing early signs of depression and should see a psychiatrist, one she had already researched and contacted. She accidentally spilled coffee on the new shirt I had purchased for myself. She called my office 3 times in one day to check if I was there. Each action only strengthened my resolve. I responded to the job offer, scheduling a video interview during my lunch break at a quiet cafe several blocks from my office. The conversation went well, better than I expected. Years of suppressing my own voice hadn't completely erased my capabilities. "We'd love to have you join us," my former colleague said at the end of the call. "Can you start in 3 weeks?" 3 weeks? The time frame felt impossible yet perfect. "Yes," I replied, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I can make that work." That evening, as she micromanaged how I loaded the dishwasher, criticizing the placement of each plate, I felt an unexpected calm. My decision was made. The countdown to freedom had a specific end date. Now, the man who had surrendered his autonomy for 30 years was methodically taking it back, one calculated step at a time. The journal I'd found in the garage was no longer just a reminder of lost dreams. It was becoming a blueprint for new ones. 3 weeks to dismantle a 30-year marriage without raising suspicion required precision, timing, and perfect acting. I accepted the job offer via email using the cafe's Wi-Fi rather than any network she might monitor. My new employer sent the contract, which I printed at a local copy shop, signed and mailed back the same day. The logistics were complex but manageable. I needed an apartment in the new city, transportation for my essential belongings, and a way to secure important documents without alerting her. Each task required stealth and careful planning. During my lunch breaks, I contacted rental agencies in my destination city. "Something simple but comfortable," I explained to the agent. "I'm starting fresh." The words tasted foreign but wonderful on my tongue. Starting fresh. At my age, many were settling into retirement planning, not reinvention. I found a modest 1-bedroom apartment near my new office and paid the deposit from my secret account. The lease would begin 3 days before my planned departure, just enough time to have essentials delivered and waiting. At home, I began a careful process of selecting what to take and what to leave behind. During her weekly book club meeting, I photographed important documents, birth certificate, passport, insurance policies, and stored the images in an encrypted folder. I couldn't risk taking the originals yet. She periodically checked our home safe. I ordered duplicates of my credit cards and had them sent to a P.O. box I'd rented. I transferred digital photos to an external hard drive, memories I wasn't willing to abandon. Even as I prepared to leave everything else, my systematic withdrawal was interrupted one evening when she confronted me at dinner. "You've been different lately," she said, her fork pushing food around rather than eating it. Distant, secretive. I kept my expression neutral. "I've been busy at work." "It's more than that." Her eyes searched mine. "You've changed how you dress. You come home smelling like coffee shops. You're on your phone more often, but never around me. Are you having an affair?" The question was so absurd given my years of complete devotion that I almost laughed. Instead, I maintained calm. "Of course not. That's ridiculous." "Then what is it?" Her voice cracked slightly. For a moment, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not fear of losing me, but fear of losing control over me. I reached across the table and took her hand, a calculated gesture. "I've just been thinking about life lately, about making some changes." "What kind of changes?" Her voice sharpened. "Nothing dramatic," I lied. "Maybe taking a photography class, getting more exercise." She relaxed visibly. "That sounds healthy. I could look into some classes for you." "I'd like to research them myself," I said. Her expression flickered before settling into forced understanding. "Of course, but let me know what you decide." That night, she was unusually affectionate, clinging to me in bed, her hands possessively roaming as if reclaiming territory. The next day, she prepared my favorite breakfast and left a loving note in my lunch bag. I recognized the pattern. Sensing my withdrawal, she alternated between suspicion and love bombing. 2 weeks before my departure, I began moving items to a small storage unit I'd rented. Nothing she would immediately notice. Winter clothes still packed away, books from my office, mementos stored in the basement. Each extraction was strategic, timed for when she was occupied or away. 10 days before leaving, I submitted my resignation at work, explaining the situation to my manager, who agreed to keep it confidential. Family emergency requiring relocation was the official reason given to HR. I arranged for my final paycheck to be direct deposited into my new account. 1 week before departure, I printed directions to my new city and apartment, memorized them, then destroyed the paper. I scheduled a rental truck for moving day and arranged for a friend, one she had never approved of and whom I had consequently lost touch with, to help me load it. 3 days before leaving, I purchased a new phone and transferred essential contacts. The old one would be left behind to avoid any tracking attempts. The night before my planned departure, we had a typical evening. Dinner that she prepared, a television show she selected, conversation that she dominated. Nothing in my behavior suggested it was our final night together. As she slept, I lay awake memorizing the ceiling I had stared at for 3 decades, feeling neither nostalgia nor regret, only resolve. Morning came with unusual clarity. She had an all-day charity event followed by dinner with her friends, a schedule that gave me a perfect window. I kissed her goodbye as she left, a performance worthy of any stage. "I love you," she said at the door, studying my face. "Have a good day," I replied, avoiding the words she expected. Her smile faltered slightly before she nodded and left. I waited 10 minutes to ensure she wouldn't return for something forgotten, then began moving with purposeful efficiency. The storage unit items went first, loaded into the truck by my friend, who asked few questions but offered steady support. Next came the items I'd secretly packed in suitcases hidden in the attic. Finally, I collected the original documents from our safe using the combination she thought I didn't know. Before leaving, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote her a letter. Not cruel, but unflinchingly honest. I explained that I was leaving to reclaim my independence, that 30 years of control had extinguished who I was, and that this decision was final. I provided no details about my destination, only that I would contact her through a lawyer regarding formal separation. With the letter propped against the fruit bowl where she would find it, I took one last look around the house that had been both home and prison. Then I walked out, closing the door on 3 decades of life as someone's possession. Driving away from the house felt like crossing a boundary between 2 worlds. Each mile added distance, not just physically but emotionally, from the life I'd been living. My friend, sensing my complex emotions, drove in silence for the first hour before speaking. "You okay?" he asked, glancing sideways at me. "I don't know yet," I answered truthfully. "But I will be." We made good time on the interstate, stopping only for fuel and quick meals. By nightfall, we had crossed state lines, and the reality of what I'd done began to truly sink in. I'd left everything familiar, our home, most possessions, the routine that had structured my days for decades, all to reclaim something intangible yet essential, my autonomy. That night in a highway motel, I turned off my new phone and slept more deeply than I had in years. No one monitoring my breathing, no one to question my dreams, no one measuring my worth against their expectations. The next day, we reached my new city by early afternoon. The apartment was exactly as described, smaller than what I was used to, but pristinely mine. My friend helped unload the truck, and with a supportive clap on my shoulder and the extraction of a promise to stay in touch, he left to drive back. Alone in my new space, surrounded by boxes containing the fragments of my former life I'd chosen to keep, I experienced a moment of paralyzing doubt. Had I overreacted? Was I having a midlife crisis 30 years too late? The questions swirled until I deliberately pushed them aside and focused on the practical task of organizing my new home. Back in my old city, she would be returning home about now. I checked my watch, 5:37 p.m. She would call out my name as she entered, expecting me to respond from my designated chair in the living room, or from the kitchen where I might be preparing tea according to her preference. Finding neither, she would check the garage for my car, then notice the letter. I imagined her reading it, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to anger. I knew her well enough to predict what would follow. First denial, then rage, then calculated efforts to regain control. My predictions proved accurate. Around 6:30 p.m., my old phone, which I kept powered on and placed on the kitchen counter of my new apartment, began ringing. Her name flashed on the screen. I watched it ring until voicemail picked up. Immediately, it rang again and again and again. Text messages followed in rapid succession. "Where are you? Call me immediately. This isn't funny. Come home now. I'm calling the police if you don't answer in the next 10 minutes. Are you having some kind of breakdown? We can get you help." The messages continued, evolving from demands to threats to emotional manipulation. "I can't believe you would do this to me after everything I've done for you. You're being incredibly selfish. You're clearly not thinking straight." By morning, she had contacted every friend and family member whose number she could find. My sister called my new phone, genuinely concerned. "Are you okay?" she asked when I answered. "She's saying you've had some kind of mental episode." "I'm fine," I assured her. "Better than I've been in years, actually." This was a carefully considered decision. "She's frantic. Says you just disappeared without warning. I left a letter explaining everything. She mentioned a note but says it doesn't make any sense. Something about feeling controlled. She says you've never complained before." I closed my eyes, recognizing the narrative being constructed. I stopped complaining because it never made any difference. "Look, I know this seems sudden to everyone else, but it's been building for decades." My sister was quiet for a moment. "Now that you mention it, you have seemed different these past few years, quieter, less like yourself." She paused before adding, "She's always been very particular about everything." That simple acknowledgement, that someone else had noticed, even peripherally, felt like validation I hadn't known I needed. Over the next few days, the messages on my old phone changed tone again, cycling through all stages of grief and manipulation. There were tearful voicemails about how she couldn't function without me, rage-filled texts accusing me of destroying her life, calculated messages about legal consequences for abandonment. I contacted a lawyer in my former city, who agreed to serve as an intermediary. "I'll handle communication regarding the separation and eventual divorce," he assured me. "You focus on rebuilding." When she learned I had legal representation, her approach shifted yet again. Family members began calling, clearly prompted by her, urging me to just talk to her and work things out. Friends I hadn't heard from in years suddenly reached out, their messages suspiciously similar in content and timing. I maintained my resolve, responding to these well-meaning intermediaries with simple, consistent messages. "This decision is final. I'm safe and well. I need space and time." A week after my departure, she somehow obtained my new phone number and called. Against my better judgment, I answered. "How could you do this?" Her voice was raw, a blend of anger and anguish I'd never heard before. "I explained in my letter," I replied calmly. 30 years, she cried. 30 years I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me? You didn't give me everything, I said quietly. You took everything. My choices, my independence, my sense of self. That's not true. I loved you. I took care of you. You controlled me. There's a difference. The conversation continued in circles, her unable or unwilling to recognize the distinction between care and control. Me unable to make her understand what had become so clear to me. Finally, I said, I need to go now. If you hang up, don't ever expect to hear from me again, she threatened, her final attempt at control. I understand, I replied and ended the call. Standing alone in my new apartment, I felt a curious lightness. The conversation that should have been devastating instead confirmed what I already knew. Leaving had been not just necessary but long overdue. The woman who had been my wife for 30 years had never truly seen me, only the version of me she had meticulously crafted. Her tears weren't for losing me as a person, but for losing her possession, her project, her living proof of perfect control. And for the first time in decades, I was free to be someone else, entirely myself. 6 months have passed since I walked out of my 30-year marriage. My apartment no longer feels temporary, but like a genuine home. My home, arranged according to my preferences alone. The walls are painted colors I selected, adorned with art that speaks to me rather than matches the furniture. Small freedoms, but ones I savor daily. My new job has been both challenging and invigorating. After decades of being told I wasn't assertive enough, wasn't strategic enough, wasn't confident enough, I've discovered these qualities were never actually missing, just suppressed. My colleagues seem to value my input, and last month I received my first performance review, which was overwhelmingly positive. You bring a unique perspective, my manager noted. There's a thoughtfulness to your approach that's refreshing. Those words stayed with me. Validation that the person I truly am has value precisely because of the traits my former wife tried to modify or eliminate. The process of legal separation has been predictably difficult. She initially refused to accept any papers, then demanded reconciliation as a precondition for negotiations, then attempted to claim I was mentally incompetent when I maintained my position. Her tactics were familiar. The same methods of control and manipulation she'd employed throughout our marriage, just amplified and directed through legal channels. My lawyer, thankfully, has seen it all before. This is actually quite common, he explained during one of our calls. When long-term control is threatened, the controlling partner often escalates dramatically before accepting reality. That escalation took many forms. She contacted my new employer, claiming concern for my well-being but transparently attempting to damage my professional standing. She sent packages to my address, sometimes containing items meant to trigger guilt, other times returning mementos in deliberately damaged condition. For 3 months, she cycled through strategies, anger, pleading, threats, false reconciliation attempts, and finally involving every mutual connection we had. Family members and friends became unwilling messengers, often prefacing their calls with uncomfortable apologies. She asked me to tell you, became a dreaded phrase. Throughout it all, I maintained boundaries that would have been unimaginable to me a year ago. I spoke with those I wished to and politely declined to engage with others. I instructed my lawyer to handle all direct communication with her. I changed my email address when the volume of messages became overwhelming. Gradually, the storm began to subside. Her messages became less frequent, her legal maneuvers less aggressive. According to mutual friends, she has begun telling people I had an affair, a narrative that paints her as victim rather than acknowledging any role in the dissolution of our marriage. I've chosen not to correct this story. Those who truly know me understand it isn't true, and for others, my reputation seems a small price for peace. In the months after leaving, I began rediscovering interests abandoned decades ago. I joined a woodworking class, creating simple but satisfying pieces with my own hands. I started hiking on weekends, exploring trails and parks in my new city. I even took a cooking course, learning to prepare meals that I enjoy rather than meals deemed appropriate for me. The most profound change, however, has been internal. The constant anxiety that once accompanied every decision has gradually faded. I no longer hear her critical voice in my head when selecting clothes or making plans. I don't automatically check the time, calculating whether I'll need to explain my whereabouts. I don't reflexively reach for my phone to report any deviation from expected routine. Last week, I received an unexpected call from my sister. I visited her, she said without preamble. How is she? I asked, surprised to find I could inquire without emotional turmoil. Doing better. I think she's redecorated the house completely. Joined some new social groups. My sister paused before adding, She asked about you. What did you tell her? The truth, that you seem happy, that you've changed in ways that are good to see. How did she react? She said she's glad you're well. It seemed genuine, but then she added that she always knew you needed her guidance to thrive, so your current success must be because of the foundation she built. The comment was so perfectly characteristic that I couldn't help but laugh, not bitterly, but with the clarity of someone who finally sees a pattern for what it is. Some things never change, I remarked. No, my sister agreed. But you did. And honestly, it was long overdue. That night, I pulled out the journal I'd found in the garage, the catalyst for my awakening. Reading through it again, I recognized the voice of my younger self more clearly now. The ambitions and dreams recorded there no longer seemed like naive fantasies, but like glimpses of who I was always meant to be. On the final blank page, I began writing again. Not about the past or what was lost, but about the present and what has been found. I wrote about the simple joy of choosing a meal without consideration of anyone else's approval, about the pleasure of spontaneous decisions, about rediscovering my voice, my preferences, my boundaries. 30 years of marriage had made me someone's property, a carefully curated possession maintained through subtle coercion and emotional manipulation. 6 months of freedom have begun the process of making me whole again. Yesterday, I received notice that she has finally agreed to mediation for dividing our assets. The document included a personal note. I still don't understand why you did this to us, but I'm ready to move forward. The phrasing was telling. She still sees my liberation as something done to her rather than something necessary for me. But her willingness to proceed is progress nonetheless. As I prepare for this final severance of ties, I feel neither triumph nor regret, only a profound gratitude for second chances. At an age when many are settled into unalterable patterns, I've discovered that change is still possible, that autonomy can be reclaimed, that it's never too late to become the author of your own story. The tears she shed when I left were real. The property she believed she'd lost was valuable to her. But the freedom I've gained is invaluable to me, and that has made all the difference. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.